So I'm going to pass over to Kelly, who's going to go through part 2 of the report.
So the second half of our report is slightly different from the first because we go into a little bit more depth. So the first part of the report really focuses on young people's rights and the extent to which they felt those rights were being upheld and supported. And the second part of the report, we go into a bit more detail about the before, during and after. Again, remembering that that's not linear, but it is a good way to describe what happens, and I suppose we need to divide it up somehow. And I suppose we looked in the report about what was working well at each of these stages and what needed to improve. So thinking about that kind of before stage, and most of these come from what Neil's just said, so it comes from the views and experiences of young people and their families. So really, I suppose, and you can see the link here with the standards down the right. I'm not going to read them out to you, but you can see these are the secure care standards that we're referring to for them, and this is, so the first part in terms of before secure care that we wanted to highlight was about the importance of family-based support. So as Neil said, families didn't always receive sufficient support to help them to care for young people. And I suppose that was at different stages. And we're talking about that before stage. Whenever we're thinking about that, what was kind of, there were two areas that were particularly challenging whenever families were accessing support, and that was whenever there was adoption arrangements or long-term fostering arrangements that were, I suppose, facing breakdown. I think a third of our sample, so that's 10 out of the 30, came from that very situation. So, and again, probably no surprises whenever you work with this group of young people, but interesting to see it so highly coming out, I suppose. And I suppose for those families, they struggle to receive support to help prevent those breakdowns from happening. They struggle to access it at the right time. The other group, if you like, that came out at this point, whenever we were talking about families, was whenever young people had additional support needs. Actually just over half of our group of 30 had some form of additional support needs, which again definitely features in our population. So aspects of featuring neurodiversity, etc., was kind of, and parents really struggled whenever teenage years hit, really, about how to manage some of the behaviour of young people, and that led to family breakdown, and families really struggled to access early support in that realm as well. Secondly, there was real variety in terms of the intensive support that was available before secure care. So what was really needed was an ability to have an intensive support to help young people to remain at home or in their long-term placement or in their residential setting, but really to help them not go in, require secure care. And it really varied across the country. So there were some really, really nice examples of how areas where people were working together, staff were coming together jointly from different agencies to provide a really intensive package of support, and that really helped a few young people in our sample. But equally, there were young people that didn't have that access, and there was a real disparity between that availability of that, and inconsistencies, and issues that we know nationally about recruitment, retention, resources, were all factors here. The last point that I want to make about the before stage was about the joint identification and response to concerns. So I mentioned at the start that there was 126 young people that areas told us about. So we think that there's probably a lot more young people that are at risk of secure care than what came back on our return, if you like, from local areas, and because areas were different in terms of how they identified young people that are at risk. So some areas were doing that really effectively, jointly, had strong processes in place, so care and risk management processes, vulnerable young persons processes, child protection processes. In a sense, from our perspective, it didn't really matter in the process. What mattered was that people were coming together jointly. They were supported by senior managers to manage high levels of risk, and there was a package of care, if you like, identified support where staff weren't left in isolation to, I suppose, help young people without really any way of helping. So that was the kind of the best examples were doing that. But again, this was an area for kind of national development, was helping this to be more consistent nationally, helping to make sure that people were doing, that staff were working jointly with each other, and that there was a kind of formal process for identifying young people at risk of coming into secure care in some form. Just thinking about the during secure care phase, so we highlighted the importance of good beginnings for young people, and we recognised that secure care providers had made really significant changes in terms of their admissions processes, and there was real kind of progress being seen here. That was something that we kind of emphasised in the review, but again, stuff to build on. As well about making sure that start and those multiple starts that young people experience, because they may come back in are positive. The second point here is about the understanding the role and the purpose of secure care, and it's a really important point of our report, is that not everybody who was working in the sector, not every young person, not every family member understood what secure was, particularly whenever at the start of their journey, but they didn't really understand, they didn't often understand the role and purpose of secure care. Why were they going to secure care? Sometimes young people make reference to a kind of punishment side of things, especially at the start. Family members, even staff, taking that kind of concept, I suppose, in mind about it's a consequence of behaviour, therefore they need to come into secure care. Whereas, if we think back, as far back in the 60s as a companion report, we've been talking for so long about seeing young people's behaviour in the context of need, and we still need that message. We still aren't doing that enough, I suppose. And even with all of the trauma-informed work that's going on nationally, there's still more to do about understanding what secure care is all about and the purpose of it. Thirdly, we pull out support while living in secure care, and we make some comments around about the work that's been done in relation to restrictive practices while in secure care settings. So we recognise the progress that's been made in terms of restrictions. There's obviously a few of the secure care standards that are particularly relevant here, that focus about making sure that restrictions are for the shortest possible time, and only whenever absolute necessity, and secure care providers were making progress with that, but there was inconsistencies there as well, so we didn't see that, there were differences between the providers and what they were doing, and I suppose we point towards the individual service inspections in this regard, and I'm just looking at Charlotte, who's in charge of the team that does those, so I'll make reference to that about the importance of building consistency and continuing to progress towards the reduction of restrictions for young people. And finally here, the importance of listening well. So as Neil made reference to, a bit of a good news story, I suppose I feel like, is that whenever young people, many of them experienced good listening, staff listening well to them, and I suppose we pull out that as a real aspect of how young people experience secure care, the importance of feeling involved, belonging, and I suppose being heard, of being essential importance, I suppose, for each of those young people. And finally, just looking in the kind of final section of our second part of the report, and we highlight these kind of 4 areas. So the first area is about moving out. So the importance of good preparation from as early as possible, the importance of having multi-agency involvement from different staff who are going to be available and in the lives of young people after they move on from secure care, and also the importance of young people being right at the centre of their voices being heard and involved, and truly involved, not tokenistically but genuinely involved in their planning, and then obviously the involvement of their families as well. We comment on the importance of accessing what the promise calls as intermediate settings. Some of you will know that language, some of you won't, but what it means is that moving on transition point, so a resource that's somewhere in between moving out of secure care, so close support sometimes it's called, whatever, but really I suppose is that transition. So the ability to have some kind of support there that's intense, that's not going from a intense support and secure care to a drop off and being and living by yourself was really difficult for some young people. So I think half of the young people who were in secure care in our review came back into secure care. So there was a real turn back. So for half of the group of young people, whenever they came back in, because there wasn't sufficient support or whatever was happening outside of it. Most, I suppose, one of the saddest parts of our review was hearing about young people's experience of homelessness. So 5 of our group of 30 were actually homeless at one point during the year that we were involved with them, and a further 4 were very close to becoming homeless because of untenable living situations that they were in. So, I mean, that's nearly a third of our group in that one snapshot of a year that were experiencing or very much at risk of experiencing homelessness. And a lot of young people really worried about that as well. So it wasn't just being homeless, it was the fear of being homeless. For some young people, it was a real fear. And we find it really sad to hear some of those stories. And that's really, I suppose, because of resources not being available for those young people. It was really hard. So some staff worked really hard to try and try and get them in the right place, try and find an intermediate setting, and knew what the young person wanted, but there was just there was no choice really for them. There was no choice for the staff, and no other option at times. And so there's a real lack of, I suppose, options at that point. We highlight the importance of staying out of secure care, so the importance of things being right at that point to avoid young people. So as I said, half of them came back in secure care, so it's common for young people to, once they're, for that not to be successful end, if you like, for it to re-happen. And I suppose that transition from back and forward was whenever young people struggled the most, of that change, of another step of, I suppose, recognising that they were potentially going backwards in terms of what they wanted because they had maybe had to come back into secure care. And so the importance of having the right support in the community after they came out of secure care was really important for them. And I suppose linked with that was the importance of relational practice. Trauma-informed practice was really important. The staff outside in the community understood their experiences, understood their background, understood what they'd been through, and understood their behaviour in the context of all of their adverse experiences throughout their life. And I suppose, again, different experiences for different young people. And the importance of having that door remaining open. So if young people didn't want support whenever they came out, or that they knew where to turn to in times of crisis, that they could kind of come back into that.
When we asked the young people, because we did when we met with them, how they would want to find out about how the review went and what we found within the review, what they preferred option was that we had a short summary video or an animated video.
We all want children and young people to be safe, well cared for, and have their rights respected. The Care Inspectorate is striving for children and young people's voices and experiences to be at the centre of our work. Through our Secure Care Pathway Review, we heard the views of over 200 people, including young people, family members and staff. We followed the secure care journeys of a group of 30 young people over a 9-month period. We wanted to find out more about what life in Scotland is like for those going into, living in and leaving secure care accommodation, and importantly, whether or not the rights of young people were being respected. This is what they told us. All young people have the right to be safe.
We felt safer when we were given the right support to keep on living at home. For some of us, home was with parents. For others, it was with carers or in children's houses.
Young people who need it have the right to recovery from trauma.
It was easier for us to receive specialist support when we lived in secure care than when we lived at home.
All young people have the right to the best possible healthcare.
We often found it difficult to get the right support for our health and well-being after leaving secure care.
All young people have the right to education.
Individual and small group learning helped most of us. It was harder to keep on learning when we left secure care.
All young people have a right to family life.
When we lived away from home, most of us were well supported to maintain and improve our family relationships.
All young people have the right to have their views respected.
Nearly all of us felt able to share our views and have a say in decisions.
So what needs to improve?
Some of us had too many changes in workers, and we need the staff working with us to stick with us. We need to stop moving to as many different places.
Our families need more support to help us stay at home. They also need more help so that when we move back home, this works out.
We need to be given the right support at the right time to help us deal with the effects of trauma in our lives.
Many of us were worried about where to live and becoming homeless. We need more support for when we are ready to leave care.
We hope that the review helps staff to continue to improve their work with young people who have lived or who might live in secure care at some point in their lives. Thanks to all the young people, family members and staff who spoke with us. To find out more, search Care Inspectorate Secure Care Pathway Review